This disclaimer, this is difficult, and I'll try my best. Okay. Mitzvah reish tes, a mitzvah atesha u'masayim. Hi shetzivonu lechabed hachachamim v'lokum mipneihem u'legadil oisam. That's Ibn Tibbon. If you recall, sometimes the vav in Arabic could be k'dei. So the question is, how many things are we talking about here? How many tzivuyim are there? So I'm not sure how you get 3 tzivuyim and what Ibn Tibbon wants, but in Kapach, it's l'chabed achachomim v'lokum mipneihem, or v'la'amoid mipneihem kidei lahadram. So the last one is the reason, okay, or what the purpose is, okay. V'amar yis'ala mipnei seva tokum v'odat pnei zoke. So it's very good. There are two things you're supposed to do. L'chabed hachachomim, I guess that's v'odat pnei zoke. V'loku mipneihem mipnei seva tokum. And then I would assume that the zoke and the seva are really the same thing and just a different way of saying the same thing. Now let's continue, and then we'll just got to go through and see what happened. V'loshen sifra tokum v'hodarta kimo sheyesh bohido. Okay, we'll have to see where this is from. Is it such a sifra? Or maybe it's a Gemara Kedushin. The Gemara Kedushin in Lamed Beis, Amud Beis, and Lamed Gimel Manav will start Yochel Yamod Miponov Mimokam Rochok Tamaloi Matokum Vadarta Lo Amalti Kimo El Mokum Sheish Hido. In Lamed Gimel Manav, Tana Ezel Kimo Sheish Bohido Havioime Zedal Ramos. There is a sifra in Kedoshim, in Parasha Gimel, Perek Zayin Alochiyud Gimel, Yochel Yamoid Lefonav Meirochok Tamalo Medata B'nei Zokein. But the explanation of why Rochok is not good is not in the sifra. It really is in the Gemara Kedushin. So this is a little bit confusing. I'm called the sifra. Here becomes interesting, okay? We're just going out of our way to say that the two tzivuyim, there's a tzivui lechabed chachomim and a tzivui lamod mipneihem. And the thrust of what he's bringing, the sifra, the Gemara Kedushin, basically intertwines them, and it's kimo sheish bohido. So l'cheira in pshuto shamiko the two tzivuyim, and comes the Kabbalah, the Sifra, and says that these two tzivuyim are not in the two separate independent tzivuyim, but they're intertwined. And Hido is Meforish Kimo, because the mitzvah is not Kimo Levad by itself, but it's a Kimo Sheish Bo Hido. So the question is, are we actually coming out that Kilu the pshuto shel mikvah, there's a mitzvah kibud and kimo, and according to the Pirush Makubal, they're intertwined. So this presents a problem. If you recall, we said in the when we were talking about the mitzvahs teichocha, and we said that Pshuto Shel Mikvah is talking about someone who it was a personal insult, and according to Rabbi Seinu, the Kabbalah, it's an issue of teichocha for someone who did an avera, not to continue doing avera, it's not something personal. And we thought that the Rambam might have a general klal that the mitzvah goes after Rabbi Seinu, the Matikia Shmur, but it's not to deny the Pshuto Shel Mikvah. And when he defines the mitzvah in the Nusach HaMitzvah, the Nusach HaMitzvah is after Rabbi Seinu. And here is just the opposite of Teichocha. Because here you're defining the mitzvah by the Pshuto Shel Mikvah, the two different things. But since it's not two in Yonei HaTeira, it's one mitzvah. And then the Pirush Makubal comes and tells you that in a certain sense, even though there are two mitzvahs, but somehow the Hidur can redefine what Kima is, which is a completely different take than we had from the mitzvah Teichocha. The question is, a priori, you would say, oh, maybe let's look and see if there actually is a mitzvah to be mechabed the Chachamim. Because the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, looking at it, Kol Talmud Chacham Perik Vov Haloch Aleph, Kol Talmud Chacham Mitzvah Lahadroi, V'afal Pi She'eno Rabboi, She'nem Mipnei Sefer Tokum V'adat Pnei Zokin, Zokin Zeh Shekol Chachma. Me'amosei Chayav M'lamoid Biponov Mishikvu Mimeno Ba'al Ba'amri. So the Rambam in Mishnah Torah seems to define the mitzvah in terms of what the Rambam is purporting here, the Sifra or the Gemara Kedushin, that it's not two separate performances, which are one in Yonei Torah, but the mitzvah is Amida b'fnei Talmud Chacham and Amida sheish bo hidur. It means b'toch daled amos. Looking at Minyan HaKotzer, he flips it. He says the mitzvah is l'chabe hachachamim shene'emar mibnei sefer tokum. And this will come to more later, but I just want to introduce it now. So in Hilchos Talmud Torah, in the Protei Mitzvahs, l'chabe melamdeo v'yodeo. So is the mitzvah kimo, or is the mitzvah l'chabe? It's confusing in the Rambam, but the idea that they're two separate sivuyim which happened to be one in Torah and formulated one mitzvah, is basically only here in Sefer Mitzvas. Now, I have an idea. So the question is, what does it mean to mechaber Talmud Chacham? We know about standing. So I have an idea of what it might be. The Rambam says something by Rabbi, and I'm wondering if we can apply it to a Talmud Chacham, but I'm not sure. But there's an amazing thing going on here. And also, in other words, is there a mitzvah? And we'll see something else. Let me show you one more thing. And this might be some semblance of something. Second. This one second. 1 second. One second. If I don't find out. Yeah. Oh. So the question is here in Perek Vav Halacha Hey. Perek Vav Halacha Hey. In Hilchos Talmud Torah. Shloisha shehoyu mahalchim b'derech. Horav b'emsa godel b'minoi kotten mismola. So it's not clear to me at this point that he's talking about the Rav in terms of Rabbi Muvok. He's talking about a godel miminoi, cotton mismoloi. Is it in kavod a Rav or it's in general? That's I'm not sure. Shleishim, because he quotes it. See, the reason why I'm a little bit confused about this, the a priori talks about the Rav, but the dinim of Rabbi we'll see later are basically in Perek Hey of Hilchos Talmud Torah. And the dinim of Talmud Chacham, called Talmud Chacham mitzvah lahadroi, ve'af pi she'eino Rabbi, is basically in Perek Vav. And he chooses to put it here, so I assume that it might not be Rav B'daf, but it's Godel. So you see something here about kavod. It's not 100%. You have to think about it. So, however, looking through the whole Perek Vav, the discussion seems to be about standing up, except for this halacha about walking together. We'll see. Okay, let's continue. Now, the idea that is the end to machabed, to mahader, an elderly person. There's no mention of this at all in Sefer Mitzvos. Mira mitzvah kotzer, lechabed hachachomim. And the Potei Mitzvahs lechabed melamdei v'yodel. But there's no mention at all of an elderly person. So l'chayr, you should assume that a seva is a zokin. And excuse me, you should assume that a seva and a zokin ainu hach, because otherwise, you could imagine the two separate mitzvahs and two separate inyanim. B'nei seva takum v'odata b'nei zokin. They're two different things. But if you're going to do that, you can't say that Hido explains Kima and the two separate concepts. So you should assume that the Hido, the subject of the Hido and the Kima are the same, and we explained that this Kima should be Kima Sheish Bo Hido. And the Targum Onkelos would support this, because Targum Onkelos on the pasuk, B'nei Seva Tokum, says Seva is the Sova B'Oraisa. So that's all nice. In Sefer Mitzvos, there's no problem. In Mishnah Torah, the problem begins because the Ram is ready to learn in Mishnah Torah that in Mibnei Seva Tokum, you could understand that there's a Zokin Muflug. The Rambam, Perek Vav, Halacha Tes, Mishu Zokin Muflug bezikna, Afal pi she'eino chacham, oimdim lefonov. Ve'afilo chacham, shehu yeled, oim b'nei hazokin hamuflug bezikna. Then he's eino chayiv la'amoid muloi koimosoi, el kedei lahadroi. So is there a kima over here? Is the hida by itself? Mibnei Seva Tokum. Vafilu zokein goy mahadrin oisai b'dvorim v'noisten lo yad l'somchoi. Shenema mibnei Seva Tokum. Kol Seva b'mishma. So it's a very strange thing. Call Seva Mishma, and we're saying the Seva Goy, you're not standing up. It's only Dvorim. So someone says Seva Tokim, and we're learning that it only means Hidur. And in the Pashtus, Zoki Muflog, who's a Jew, Oimdim Lefonov. Vafilu Zokin Goy Mahadrin Loisai Bidvorim V'noisten Loi Yad L'Somchoi Shenem B'nei Seva Tokum Kol Seva B'Mishma. So the question is, what's happening over here? And this l'chayr sounds like Isi ben Yehuda in the Gemara Kedushin, Lamed Beis, where the Gemara says Isi ben Yehuda oimer mi b'nei Seva Tokum afilu kol Seva b'mishma. But even before you get started, there's something you have to think about. afilu kol sefer b'mishma. You're just talking about goy, or the idea about sefer itself? We have to know. And the real important question is, if sefer actually means a goy, so why is it enough to do hidul dvorim? And if sefer is actually mashma zoki muflug, how could you use what the Chachamim learn and the Rabbi Seinu, the Sefer, that kimo sheyesh bo hido? Because hido is written by Zokein and not on sefer. And what does the Ram mean? Alpha piece here, it's an apology. Why can you say that Alpha piece ain't a chacham or even the fun of? Oh, that's the mitzvah. What do you have to apologize for? Oh, you should I'm saying. Oh, the mitzvah is to stand. What Alpha piece ain't a chacham? You need an apology. So here again, we're going to flip-flop. I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do. Because I would have said, had I not had the problem which I started out in the beginning, I get two tzivuyim, I would have said that the Kabbalah from Rabbi Seinu, as Uncle says, is Sova Baraisa, and we're talking about, and what the mitzvah is, Hidor and Kavod to a Chacham. However, that b'mishma, that in the fi pshuta shel mikra, there's a mashmos of a zokei muflug, so the memela, there's an inyan, there's a mitzvah tofel kilu to show some type of reverence to a zokei muflug, and even by a goy. But the Ika mitzvah is the Pirush Makubal, and the Pshuta mitzvah Tvela. And the Ika mitzvah is like Unkus, Sova Baraisa, and the Pirush Makubal is the in the Pirush Makubal, the subject of both Kima and Hido is a Chacham. And therefore, there's one mitzvah, and a mitzvah. We're back. The circle comes, and this is all very nice. Still, we don't understand what is the chiddush or the difference between a sefer of a goy or a sefer of a Jew, and why it's enough for hidul dvorim by a sefer of a goy. This still needs work. But more important is my original question. Now, how do you do it? Because if you're going to say, the way the Rambam starts at the beginning of the HaMitzvos, that they're actually two tzivuyim, even though he doesn't mention it any place. So in every place, it's okay that the Pirush Makubal says it all forms into one tzivuy. It's kibud and hidor together. So that would be very nice. But the question is over here. No, I'm not sure. Maybe you shouldn't put Mishnah Torah together, what's going on over here. And in Mishnah Torah, he's ready to accept Zochi Muflug. Here he's not. So we just have to understand what's going on. The problem is that I can explain each phenomenon separately, and I can explain Mishnah Torah by itself, and I can explain Sefer Mitzvah itself, put it all together, I can't, but I'm not sure that I have to. Because it could be mysterious. I don't know. So this is issue number one. And I can't say that I understand exactly, but I think we understand. The problem is, how many tzivuyim are there? What's the relationship between the two tzivuyim? Are we talking only about chacham? And can we include a zoke, muflug? Then we still have another problem, because the Ram says, as Kapach translates it, it's kedei lahadra. It's lechabet chachomim v'la'amoy b'pneihem kedei lahadra, kedei lahadrom. So it's very confusing. Can you at the same time say hidur is a tzivui and also the matorah, the purpose of the mitzvah? Because that's what's happening. You say it's a chabed, that's hidur, and it's the matorah, lahadrom. It's also very confusing. Next, Vidah. So here, we've taken care of Chacham. We're still confused. Is there a mitzvah to mechabed the Chacham, or it's just lokum? Here, he seems to say that it's both. And in all the other places, both in the Protei Mitzvahs and in Minyan HaKotzer, he says the mitzvah lechabed. Lechabed assumes more than just chemo. And let's see. Vidah, and continuing the text of the Rambam, she'im heyois mitzvah zo muchuyeves la'anoshim kulon bichlal. Here, his kapach is probably a little bit clear. Vidah she'af al pi she'mitzvah zo chova al kol odom biofen kloli kloima lechabe hachachomim. Vafilu chochom. Okay. So he's saying there's a mitzvah that's on everyone. Anyone who sees a chacham has to stand up for the chacham. It's not because you have a personal relationship with the chacham. It's the fact that he's a chacham. Okay. Then the Rambam throws in a line, which is an amazing line. The amazing part of it is that he tags on something, a new aspect in a mitzvah deraisa, a new aspect in a mitzvah deraisa, even though in Mishnah Torah he doesn't mention it at all. And let's see, it's a Gemara, which everyone knows. Let's just see. It's a Gemara in Elam Mitzias. Vafilu chochom, lechochom ashovel bechochmo. Two Talmidei Chachamim of equal stature. So I'm saying that there's a mitzvah deraisa for each one to stand up for the other one. Ki moshesh bohidu. Because he's a chacham. And he says, oh, that's the chat in the Gemara. Kmo shebeiro biomrom תלמידי חכמים שבבבל, עומדים זה מפני זה. Say, the Gemara is telling you a story that that's the way they acted in Babel. Some said, no, this is the mitzvah deraisa of Bnei Sefer Tokum, that each chacham has to stand up for another chacham, even though they're of equal stature. And then, that's what he says, the Rambam. And the interesting thing is, there's no reflection of this in Mishnah Torah. The Rambam doesn't say that a chacham over his equal should stand up for another chacham. So it's an amazing thing. In Sefer Mitzvas, there's a mitzvah deraisa in standing up for chacham who's your equal, and not mentioned in Mishnah Torah. So I'd like to try to tackle that, and we'll see. So the question is, what's happening over here? And is the Rambam's hashmota, the fact that the Rambam leaves out this din of an equal, a chacham of the equal, is omission, commission. And maybe you should look at it like that, because the Rambam's obligation in Mishnah Torah is to quote all dinei Torah, even the Rabbanon. So if it's a deraisa din to stand up for chacham who's your equal, he should have quoted it. Before we move on, I just like to read you the Gemara Mitzvah, because the Gemara Mitzvah says, Oma Ula Talmidei Chachamim shebevovel oimdim ze mipnei ze v'koirin ze al ze. A priori, looking at the Gemara, the din of Amida and the din of Kriya are hainu hach. And l'chayr, according to the Rambam over here, the Kriya is also on an equal, I would have assumed. However, the Rambam in Hilchos Ovel quotes the second half of the Gemara and quotes it the following way. Then we'll see later how other Rishonim interpret the Gemara. The Rambam Perek Tes of Hilchos Ovel, Halacha Yud Aleph. Ukvar nogu Talmidei Chachamim b'chol mokom. The Rambam says kvar nogu Talmidei Chachamim b'chol mokom. L'kroye ze al ze tefach. Af al pi she'ein shovim ve'ein echod mehem melamed es chaveira. So, l'chayra, the Rambam is explaining that the Gemara in Baba Metzia is not a din, but kach nogu chachmei Talmud, in a mutual, the way they were mechabed each other. V'kach nogu Talmidei Chacham b'chol mokom l'kroye ze al ze tefach af al pi she'ein shovim ve'ein echod mehem melamed es chaveira. The Radvaz learns like that. That in Shovin, there's no chiyuv, it's only a minig. Radvaz over there on the Rambam in Hilchos Ovel. But l'cheira, according to the Rambam, this din of Ula, or Ma'ula Tamachom Shebavov Oim Zeh Mipnei Zeh, is a deraisa din. It's not a minig. And interesting, the Lechem Mishnah in Mishnah Torah, because of this Ram Hilchos Ovel, says that Amida B'Chochom Hashove is also only in a minig and not a din. And Adrabah, maybe that's why the Ram doesn't quote it in Mishnah Torah, because the minig is only as much as people are noyeg, and people are noyeg to be korea for one chacham on another, but they won't noyeg to stand up for an equal chacham. If that's the case, there's a clear reversal in Rambam. That in Sefer Mitzvas, there's a mitzvah deraisa to stand up, one for another. In Mishnah Torah, he's not a member of Ula, is only a minig, and he doesn't quote it because it's not nog. Only the kriya is noig, and that's what he says b'chol mochim, and that's what he quotes in Hilchos Ovel. But whatever it is it comes out over here that the Rambam is interpreting the memra, is that Tamidim Chacham and Shovim, they never spoke to each other, they never had any masumatin. It's a double poshet. One did not learn from the other, and it's a chiyuv amida. Either according to the Rambam here, it's a deraisa din, or kach no guba bavel. Comes to Rishonim on the daf and Baba Metzia and have a whole different approach. Start with Chanano, Rashi, we'll see one at a time. It's Mamish Rishonim, Rashi, but the Ramban not going to go through all of them. But it's all basically the same. Rabbi Chanano and Baba Metzia in Eila Metzias, Divra Maskal, Oma Ula, Tamidim Chacham shebavov on zeh mipnei zeh v'koyin zeh al zeh v'chulei pirish kiven shenoisin zeh im zeh ba'alocha. Since they interact, it's not two chacham who never met each other. Since they interact, shenoisin zeh im zeh ba'alocha loimdim zeh mizeh Taimim Rabbi Harbe Ki Rabbi Hu Choshev. So since they interact with each other and each one teaches the other, each one legabe the other one is Rabbi. Kol echo lechaveiroi. Ki Rabbi Hu Choshev Kol echo lechaveiroi. Lefichach oimdim zeh mibnei zeh v'koyin zeh al zeh. Chein Rashi so it's a double portion. It's a foolish and taste of Russia. Also, Chachamim. We showing him one after the next. Rash Ramban Rashbo. There's no chiyuv deraisa for or even in the Rabbanon for shovin. The whole issue that one chacham stands for another because he is a Talmud, possibly, because they know him and noisim ba'alocha. A whole different approach. there is something just to think about. And a priori, I would have taken the Rambam's side in Sefer Mitzvas. If there is a mitzvah to mechabed a Talmud Chacham, and here we're not talking about Teres Rabbi. The next discussion will be about Rabbi. B'nei Sefer Tokum, Vodat B'nei Zoken. So if he's my equal, I should be mechabed him. And it comes out, according to others, the mitzvah to mechabed the Chacham is only because he's greater than you. And maybe Rabbi. But if you're not a Chacham, you have to mechabed every Chacham. It's a very strange thing. And that's the Rambam's trying to say. And that's what he goes out of his way. And he says, Mechuyeves lanoshin kulam. And that's what Kapach says. V'da she'afa pisha mitzvah zo chayva al kol adam, right? And l'chayra, according to the Rishonim, the Chacham is part of from the mitzvah. Because he's not mechuyev to another Chacham. It's only because they were noisy and noisy, and maybe, he's my rabbi, and the other one may be rabbi. I learned from him. But two Chacham who never met each other, he has no chiyuv. It's an amazing thing, A priori, you would look at the Rambam, in Sefer Mitzvah, not Mishnah Torah. The Rishonim assume not like that, and maybe the Gemara is mashma. It's telling a story. That's the way with Rabbi Nivus, they looked at each one as a rabbi. Okay, just a very interesting thing. Next comes the Rambam and continues. Da sheyesh bekavod dvor miyuchadim v'noisofim al hatalmid. And that also the Kapach also shekover hatalmid l'rabbi yesh boy tesefes gedula ala kovod shehu chayva l'chol chacham. Here, it's very clear that there's a mitzvah to mechabed. It's covered. He goes again, what he mentioned at the beginning about covered, he goes again and again. He says, Yesh ki covered a Talmud l'Rabbi, yesh boy tesefes gedula, ala kovid shuhu chayev l'kol chacham. So there's a mitzvah to mechabed the chacham. V'yischayev loy ima kovid amoira. And not only is the kovid for Talmud for Rabbi, but there's moira. Shehem kvar bero shechoik Rabbi olav because it's greater than Oviv, and Oviv has covered Umayra. So Rabbi also, Shechiva Kosuv Lechabdoi Veliro Mimeno. And here it certainly is covered. Because there's a mitzvah Mechabed Oviv, and lira mimenu. So that's by Rabbi, and he says it's teisefes. So it's very clear there's an inyan to mechaber chacham. And he says, "V'beya omru aviv v'rabbi rabbi kodim." So it's a Mishnah in Bava Metzia, in Elu Metzias, Perek Beis, Mishnah Yud Aleph, aviv v'rabbi rabbi kodim. So din kedima. And the Ram learned the din kedima is the charaya, and the whole din kavod of chacham comes from aviv, of rabbi comes from aviv, and since he's kedem, it's a raya doch that is greater. And so he learns with be'omu this a raya that chok rabbi olav yoisegodo mechok aviv. Now, just let me take this one part here. Let's just I'm taking a little part here. The Mishnah Bava Metzia says, Avedas Aviv, Avedosai, Avedas Aviv, Avedosai Kedemis. Avedosai, Avedas Rabbi, Shaloi Koidem. Now is the important thing. Avedas Aviv, Avedas Rabbi, Shal Rabbi Kedemis. If it's a question of Aviv and Rabbi, Rabbi is Koidem. She'aviv heviu lo'elam hazeh, v'Rabbi shelimdei chochma meviu l'chayim haba. And it means the Ram's learning it's not a stamad din kedima, but the Rabbi is greater in the kavod. And the Ram says this in the Pirush Mishnah increases that it's not only in Aveda, it's in a whole slew of issues. Increases Perek Vav Mishnah Tes. The Ram says in Pirush Mishnah is Perek Vav Mishnah Tes increases v'omu b'chol mokim roitzeloima lohoshiv Aveda v'liftois u'lahachiois v'lifrik me olov k'mo sheniska b'mitzia. It means prika, but the prika that we know about, which is on Adam, v'chol adoyma lekach, not on a behema, that the Ram hadn't said from this. Remember, there's prika on Adam also, the prikantina. V'chol adoyma lechol lekach mikol hadvorim sheish ben minias hezek oy havos toeles harei rabbi kedem. I thought that's a mitzvah from kavod. Minias hezek and avos toelis is kavod. So I ask myself, and the Ram has this also. Let's start slow like this. In Hilchos Talmud Torah, Perek Hey Aloch Aleph, Kishem she'odam mitzuv b'choved aviv v'yirasei, kachu chay b'choved rav v'yirasei. Yes, me aviv. She'aviv vil l'chayil haba, v'rav l'im l'teira mevil. She'aviv mevil l'om hazeh, chayil hazeh. V'rabbi shel chochma mevil l'chayil l'om haba. Ro'o avedas aviv avedas rabbi shel rabbi kedemis l'shel aviv. Aviv v'rabbi noisim b'masa meniach es shel rabbi v'achar kach shel aviv. So here we're talking about Prekam people. It's interesting. In Mishnah Torah, in Prekatin, doesn't mention as part of the mitzvah, but he mentioned over here in Talmud Torah. Of v'rabbi shvuyim b'shivya, they were captives. poide es rabbi. Ve'achach poide es oviv. V'im hoya oviv talmud chacham, poide es oviv. Okay. Now, I want to do like this. Just 1 second. Yeah. 1 second. Yeah. I'm going to read to you a line here. 1 second, believe that. 1 second. This will be no good for later, but I want to show you that there might be an inyan of kavod to a Talmud Chacham. Yeah, I'm going to read to you now Tshuvas Rambam, and we'll have to pick it up. Not sure we'll get to it this week, but listen to this tshuva. Siman Kuf Yud in Tshuvas Rambam. Aval liyoisa yodua b'yir shemayim uv'chochmo ein roi lo yima'olov dovo ad asher yishama dvoroi. Hoil, we shouldn't be down in the kaf, hoil, whatever, we should down in the kaf. Hoil v'atera kedosha chiva, this is the important thing. Hoil v'atera hakedosha chiva lahade talmidei chachamim ulahachriyon lekaf schus ulahalim ayin mishigoiseyim b'tuyoiseyim im to'u kefi shezeh mufusam yedu anchi yir shamayim v'chochma. So whatever he's saying over here, he clearly is ready to say that it's not just standing up, but there's something about you have to be mechaber the Talmud Chacham. So I can imagine that we have to go back and look at the Seder in Pidyon Shvuyim and Haveda. Is a Chacham before, and where is the Chacham? But I could imagine that since there's a mitzvah, because it seems that whenever there's a question of Kedima, of Pidyon Shvuyim, Kavod plays. And that's a Rayadach because Kavod Rabbi is greater than Kavod Ovim. So I could imagine maybe that Kavod Chacham should play a role in all these issues if the Shavui is a Chacham. Now, let's proceed. Now, let's just say like this, and we'll pick this up, I think, a little bit. The question is, start like this. If you look in Mitzvah, Reish Yud, so we understand now this Kavod Rabbi and this Moira Rabbi. And L'chair we'll see later also, we're learning out Rabbi from Oviv. So the Ram says in Mitzvah Reish Yud, he should zivonu l'chaber oveim. V'omo yis'ale, chaber esavicho v'yasimecho. והסבור משפטים בצזור וכולי. ולושן ספרו, איזהו כבוד, מאכיל ומשקה, מלביש ומכסה, מכניס ומוציא. I'm using the whole Sefer as is quoted in both Kisvei Yad, even though it's not in Ibn Tibben. But I asked myself a question. Do you find a din by Rabbi of Machil, Umashke, Malbish Umachase, Machnis Umoitzi? Call we have to see, but it's not, I don't know, is the mitzvah to take physical care of the of Rabbi? And then let's start the other way. In Shiur Aleph, mitzvah achas esrei u'masayim hi shetzivonu liro me'avein. V'hu she'is naheg imohem k'minig mi she'yore mimenu v'yanisheu. Here we have to talk about what it means. It's kedarisi kapach. Then he says like this. I'm skipping this over now because this is I don't want to get into this at the moment. V'loshen sifra ezeu meira lo yeshe b'mekoymoi v'lo meda b'mekoymoi v'lo yiseis es dvorov. Is the meira rabbi the same as of? Because the Rambam over here introduces a whole new idea. And he says, Ukva biroi, she'eno muter, or she'oso, letalmud lachlik al rabbi, goitzaloyma b'chilek lotzeis be'rosoi, under this jurisdiction. V'dino, v'shiim's b'svarosoi, melamed or yodun or yoyra, that he acts as if Kilu explained Yiddish and Egan Mensch, that he's an independent authority. He's an independent Melamed, he's an independent Dan, he's an independent Moira Hara, Im lo yiteng lo rishus. That's not by Oviv. V'ei mutaloi od liskoiteit imoi, o lisroim imenu, o lechoshtoi. This choshe b'ksherim. What's loima? He can't be, and or the kapach says, l'donoi say the kaf choiva. Can't be done with kaf choiva. What's loima? Shi'are olav, poil, oy maima kimin mimini ahiro. Ki efsha shaloi lotza bezel, efsha lo yischaven bezel. It's possible. We have to compare this to mitzvah Kufayin Zayin. It said Tishbar Bisecha. And the Ram says there is an in of Dan, part of the mitzvah is Dan L'Kaf Schus. We have to understand what this is. And then the Rambam adds a new level over here, which I have to discuss all this on Mitzvah Shem next week, B'li Neder, that he compares Rabbi, Chilik al Rabbi to Chilik al Shechina. Again and again. Oisem Ribu Rabbi to Oisem Shechina. V'hara Rabbi karach Shechina. And then he says, this is Machlokes Korach, Umurivas Yisrael to Noisab, Hashim B'choshtom, Omnom, Hoya Imoishe, the Olav, Shehoya Rabun Shokol Yisrael. It's an amazing, you have to sit down and break your head of this. It's Moshe Rabbeinu B'Toras Rabun Shel Yisrael. And you can learn from that to call Rabbi Muvok, or call Rabbi. The way you act, you interact with him. V'soma kosav kol inyan mehem al Hashem. Cholik al Hashem. To understand what this means, to go through this carefully, B'li Neder. Be'omu, moir rab chokmoy shemaim. To see, and go back to Shorish Beis, the Rambam talks about the Bahag, And what is Mor Rabchok Mor Shemaim? He didn't quote the pasuk over here, but he quotes it in Shirish Beis, and the Bahag has a separate mitzvah minyan mitzvahs. So is it like Rabbi? Is it like a Kodesh Baruch Hu? And then he ends off. V'zeh kuloi lokuch beraya miyois hakosu mitzvah lechabe es hachachamim v'ovos. So it comes from Chacham and always, not from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the final thing you have to evaluate what the relationship between Kavod Rabba and Kavod Chacham and the Seder of the Rambam in Mishnah Torah and Perek Hey and Perek Vav B'chos Talmud Torah. Hatzlacha Rabba.